On August 13, 2025, the Supreme Court delivered a decision that will be remembered as a turning point in the history of American trade policy. The ruling, closely watched by legal experts, lawmakers, and business leaders alike, sent shockwaves through Washington and beyond. This decision fundamentally redefines how the United States approaches trade with the rest of the world, and it signals a new era for the balance of power in Washington. At the heart of the case was the legality of tariffs imposed during the Trump administration on steel and aluminum imports, enacted under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. These tariffs were justified on the grounds of national security, sparking intense debate and legal challenges. The real issue, however, was the ongoing struggle over who holds the ultimate authority to regulate foreign commerce, the president or Congress. This question has shaped U.S. trade policy for decades. For years, the president's power to impose tariffs for reasons of national security has been a source of controversy, with critics arguing it gave the executive branch too much unchecked authority. Now, the Supreme Court's decision sets clear and enforceable limits, recalibrating the tools available to any president who seeks to use protectionist measures. This ruling is expected to have a lasting impact on how future administrations approach trade. By scrutinizing the definition of national security in the context of trade, the court has established new boundaries for its use, making it harder for presidents to invoke national security as a blanket justification for tariffs. This moment could restore a more traditional, congressionally led approach to trade, or it may prompt lawmakers to draft new legislation that further clarifies the roles and responsibilities of both branches of government in shaping trade policy. The implications of this decision are vast, touching every corner of U.S. economic and foreign policy. From manufacturers and exporters to consumers and global trading partners, the effects will be felt for years to come. Ultimately, the Supreme Court's ruling marks a critical juncture for America's engagement with the world economy, shaping the nation's role on the global stage and influencing how the U.S. will compete and cooperate in the years ahead. The legal battle over Section 232 was spearheaded by a coalition of steel importers and manufacturers who found themselves directly impacted by the sweeping tariffs imposed by the Trump administration. These companies, representing a broad cross-section of American industry, argued that the tariffs threatened their businesses, increased costs, and disrupted long-standing international partnerships. Their central argument was that Section 232, as interpreted and used by the executive branch, amounted to an unconstitutional delegation of legislative power. They claimed that Congress had handed over too much authority to the president, allowing him to make major economic decisions without clear guidelines or meaningful oversight. According to the Constitution, it is Congress, not the president, that holds the explicit power to regulate foreign commerce and impose tariffs. This separation of powers is a foundational principle, designed to prevent any one branch from wielding unchecked authority over the nation's economic policy. Plaintiffs contended that the law's vague and broad reference to national security effectively gave the president a blank check to impose tariffs for almost any reason, with little accountability or transparency. They pointed out that the tariffs were not limited to adversaries, but were also applied to close allies like Canada and the European Union. This, they argued, exposed the tariffs as tools of economic protectionism rather than genuine measures to safeguard national security. As the lawsuits made their way through the courts, lower judges were divided. Some deferred to the executive branch, citing the president's broad discretion in matters of national security, while others warned that such unchecked power could undermine the very checks and balances the Constitution was designed to protect. Ultimately, the Supreme Court was called upon to resolve this fundamental question. Where does Congress's authority over trade end, and where does the president's begin? The justices faced the challenge of drawing a clear line between legislative and executive power. The case was about far more than just tariffs or steel imports. It was a pivotal moment for the Constitution's separation of powers, testing the limits of executive authority and economic policy. The court's decision now stands as a safeguard, protecting both national security interests and the constitutional order that underpins American democracy. By reaffirming the balance of power envisioned by the framers, the ruling ensures that no single branch can unilaterally reshape economic policy, preserving the careful system of checks and balances at the heart of the nation's founding document. For 150 years, Congress controlled tariffs and trade policy, directly legislating rates and shaping economic policy. This system was slow and prone to protectionism, leading to infamous laws like Smoot-Hawley. The shift began in 1934, when Congress gave the president authority to negotiate trade agreements for greater flexibility. During the Cold War, laws like the Trade Expansion Act of 1962 further expanded executive power, linking economic and military strength. For decades, these powers were used sparingly and for genuine security threats. The Trump-era tariffs marked a dramatic departure, using Section 232 for broad economic reasons and sparking a national debate. The Supreme Court's ruling is the latest and most significant turn in this ongoing struggle over the constitutional balance in trade policy. The Section 232 tariffs, imposed in the name of national security, had complex and polarizing economic effects that rippled across the American economy. These measures were intended to protect domestic industries, but their impact was far from straightforward. Domestic steel and aluminum producers initially saw a noticeable boost in output, profits, and jobs. Plants that had been struggling or even shuttered reopened, and workers in these sectors experienced a sense of renewed optimism as demand for American-made metals surged. However, industries that rely heavily on these metals, such as automotive manufacturing, aerospace, and construction, were hit with higher input costs. This led to increased prices for finished goods, reduced investment, and ultimately, higher costs for consumers. Many companies faced tough choices, from scaling back production to delaying expansion plans. Studies revealed that while there were job gains in the steel and aluminum sectors, these were more than offset by job losses in downstream industries. The overall employment picture became more negative as layoffs and plant closures mounted in sectors affected by rising costs. Retaliatory tariffs from other countries struck back at U.S. exports, especially in agriculture. American farmers, already facing tight margins, saw billions in losses as foreign markets closed their doors to products like soybeans, pork, and dairy. Iconic brands like Harley-Davidson became high-profile casualties, forced to shift some production overseas to avoid tariffs. Global supply chains were thrown into disarray, causing delays, uncertainty, and increased costs for businesses large and small. The net effect was clear. While a few industries and workers benefited, the costs were spread widely across the economy. Small businesses, in particular, struggled to absorb higher prices, and many communities saw more losses than gains. As a result, U.S. GDP growth slowed, and the policy ultimately led to a net loss of jobs nationwide. The promise of broad economic revival proved elusive for most Americans. The debate over the tariffs became a microcosm of a larger national question. Do the short-term benefits of protectionism justify the broader, long-term economic harm? Lawmakers, business leaders, and workers found themselves deeply divided. Ultimately, the economic data and the lived experiences of millions set the stage for the Supreme Court's constitutional decision, highlighting the far-reaching consequences of trade policy choices. In the Supreme Court, the government argued the president needs broad discretion under Section 232 to address national security threats. They claimed Congress intentionally gave the executive flexibility to act in a complex world. Opponents countered that the law lacked clear limits, letting the president impose tariffs for almost any reason, an unconstitutional transfer of power. Justices pressed both sides. Could any import be declared a security threat? How should courts distinguish real threats from economic policy? The debate was about more than one law. It was about the nature of power in modern governance. The court had to find a constitutional balance between executive flexibility and congressional authority. Their decision would shape the future of American trade and the separation of powers. The Supreme Court's decision places clear limits on the president's use of national security to justify tariffs. Future presidents must now provide rigorous, specific justifications for such actions. The era of sweeping, unilateral tariffs is likely over. The ruling will spur Congress to reclaim a central role in trade policy, with new laws requiring more oversight and transparency. Internationally, the decision signals a return to stability and rules-based trade, mending strained alliances. The ruling is a powerful judicial check on executive overreach, reaffirming the separation of powers. It forces future administrations and Congress to collaborate on trade, leading to more durable policies. The long-term impact: a more balanced, predictable, and constitutionally sound approach to U.S. trade. Industry reactions were sharply divided. Steel and aluminum producers decried the ruling, fearing renewed foreign competition and job losses. Manufacturers and consumer industries celebrated, expecting lower costs and more stable supply chains. On Capitol Hill, lawmakers split along partisan lines. Some praised the decision as a victory for congressional authority and the separation of powers. Others warned it weakened America's ability to confront unfair trade practices. The ruling sets the stage for contentious legislative battles over the future of U.S. trade laws. The debate over trade policy remains as fierce as ever. The Supreme Court's ruling sets a new course for U.S. trade policy. The administration must now review and likely revise existing tariffs to comply with the court's stricter standards. Diplomatic engagement and negotiation will replace unilateral tariff actions. Congress is expected to introduce reforms requiring more transparency and oversight of presidential trade powers. Globally, the U.S. signals a move back to rules-based trade and renewed cooperation with allies. The era of the imperial presidency in trade is over. A more balanced approach is required. America's future trade strategy will depend on collaboration between Congress and the White House. The court's ruling offers a path to a more effective and constitutionally grounded trade policy. The Supreme Court's decision is a foundational reset for American trade policy. By limiting unilateral presidential power, the court reasserts Congress's primacy in foreign commerce. The ruling ends an era of disruptive trade wars and demands greater collaboration between branches of government. It challenges lawmakers to craft a modern, bipartisan trade framework amid deep divisions. For the world, it signals a return to predictable, alliance-friendly U.S. trade leadership. The legacy of the Section 232 tariffs is one of disruption and necessary clarification. The essential task now for America's leaders to forge a smarter, more sustainable trade strategy for a competitive global economy.